Stems. What are they? Why are they? How do we do them? Why do we do them? For who do we do them? All these questions and more will be answered on this week's episode of Mark Kilian's channel, where we're always learning, working with stems. The first question is, why do we do stems? What is the purpose of it? To answer that question, let me just outline a little bit of how this process works. I am working on a movie. In this case, it's called Deep Blue Sea 3. They are starting a mix next week, and I'm preparing my music to send over to them for their mix. Now, I am going to mix my track here to the best of my ability to make sure it sounds as best as I can. Make sure all the frequency ranges are right, make sure instruments are not too loud and popping out and all this kind of stuff. If I was working on a higher budget film, I would be using my mixer Casey Stone, who lives in England. I would send him all these tracks and he would do the mix for me, and then he would be responsible for printing the stems. But in this case, I am. And when I'm finished with this, I will send not all these tracks, because that's just too much for someone to deal with. I will send stems, which are breakdowns, which are submixes of like sounding tracks. For example, if I have 20 tracks of different kinds of drums and things like this, I might combine that all into one drum stem. I have strings. In this case, it's not a live string group, but if it was a live string group, I'd have, a plethora of tracks from the recording of all the violins and all the stuff, and that would be combined into one stem. And why do we do that? Because when you're sitting on a stage and you're for the first time seeing all these elements come together, don't forget, I've been working on this picture for 3 months, and all the dialogue and all the sound effects that I'm hearing in there are all temporary, and a lot of the times they're just not there, non-existent. So when you're sitting in this big mixing theater for the first time and you're hearing all these elements together, things sound different. You're going to need a little bit of flexibility in your music without having to come back to your studio and reprint every time you want to change something. That's just not a feasible way of working. You need to have the flexibility to be able to do that at the mix stage. Now, what is the mix stage? Well, I mix my music here. That's called the music mix. When they do the final mix of the film, which is also called the dub, they do it on a mix stage or a dub stage, which is like a big movie theater, except there are no chairs in there, and in the middle is a long mixing desk. And there will be sometimes up to 3 people, mixers, behind that mixing desk. One will be mixing all the dialogue tracks, one will be mixing all the sound effects tracks, and the other one will be mixing all the music tracks. On lower budget films like this one, there might be only 2 mixers doing those jobs, or maybe only even 1. The other reason is for picture changes and for edits. Now, even though the theory is to add a final dub and final film mix to have the film be completely locked. In other words, there are no changes happening anymore. No one's cutting anything. That's just not how it works these days because of digital technology. They have the ability to continue editing throughout this process, which is a little nuts. But it happens, and it's happening more and more. And if you are confronted with a picture change on that dub stage, and you don't have stems, it's really hard to cut your music if you're just working with a stereo and to be able to make a new edit that now works with a picture. If you've got stems, it's so much easier to make these big edits, these big time edits in your track. You can cut the strings separately and you can cut the bass separately and the guitar separately, and so you have a lot more flexibility in how you can rework a cue to work to new picture, or indeed if the director suddenly decides that he wants that cue to carry on for another 30 seconds, it's so much easier to do that if you're working with stems. You don't have to run back to your studio to redo that cue. Okay, so let's dive in and take a look how this works in the program. So just as a general thing, and maybe you should go check out my episode on my template building, just so you can get a really in-depth idea of what I'm doing here. But just for the purposes of this episode, I'm working in Ableton Live on this side, and then Logic Pro on this side, and Logic Pro is my master, and Ableton is the slave. So Ableton is rewired into Logic, and comes up on a bunch of tracks in Logic. So I have, at the top of my session, I have the dialogue and the temp track that comes from the movie. Then I have my music master, which everything is bussed into. This is the final music track. And then the print bus, which is where I print all my stereo mixes. Then I have my masters and my stems. Now we're going to be dealing obviously with the stems. This is where we're going to print our stems. The masters basically feed into the stems. We don't have to deal with the masters right now. The masters is where I will do a gain change on the strings, for example. Turn the strings up if I just feel in general all the strings are too soft and I want them all up. I can do that in my masters. The stems as well, print the stems as I said. Then after that I have all the Ableton live tracks coming in from Rewire. And then after that I have all my audio tracks. Any track that is basically an audio track is in there, and then my instrument tracks, which is all my contact instruments and EXSs and divas and whatever you have, will be there. And then I have all my virtual orchestra, which is running off another machine over there through VE Pro. All of this again explained in detail in my template episode. I have all my strings, various different, broken up into various different string libraries. Each one has a different sound, and then brass, and then woodwinds, and then pianos, and then orchestral percussion. We're not dealing with any of those, but for the purposes of this, what you need to know is that all of my virtual stuff is already pre-bussed to the correct stem, meaning the strings are pre-bussed into the string stem over here, and the brass is pre-bussed into the brass stem. I don't need to touch that. That is happening automatically, and any reverb that is associated with that is bussed into that stem. Now, when it comes to the audio tracks and instrument tracks, none of this is predetermined or pre-bussed into a stem track. All of this stuff is just pre-bussed, you can see here, into my, let me open this window up, into my final music master. And that is how my template is built, because when it comes to working in audio and instrument tracks, I very often just want a blank slate there. It would be impossible to unless you're working on a movie that has a very distinct band, if you like, or a group of instruments, and it's going to be the same for every cue. When you're working on this kind of movie, it's not like that. And so I just have everything bussed to the master music, which is this guy here. And so everything's coming through here. Now what I'm going to do is go through and assign each and every track to a stem bus, to a master bus that eventually ends up in a stem bus. So let's say, for example, I start out with this track, which is a Moog synthesizer. Right now it's bussed to the main music master, as I just explained. And here are my masters, and here are my stems. I'm going to bus it to the master because the master goes into the stem. It's essentially the same thing. So this is what I have to work with. I have a total of 15 buses here that I can work with. And I have one reverb bus. Now the reverb bus is a special thing that I do for movies where I don't have my mixer mixing the movie and I don't work in a surround situation here. So this is a stem of just reverbs, but not all the reverbs, only specially chosen reverbs, mostly very long effector types of reverbs, and that will end up on a separate stem so that on the dub stage, when they're finally mixing the movie, he has one stem of reverb stuff that the mixer will be able to put into the surrounds, and that way get kind of a pseudo surround sound from the music, in addition to the type of processing that he's already going to do to make it sound like surround. It's just another level, another step of flexibility for the mixing engineer at the dub stage to be able to get the music to sound surround. Now, if Casey, my mixer, or whoever it may be, is mixing this, they are going to be mixing it 5-1 in a proper 5-1 tuned room and everything, and that'll be a whole different ballgame. They'll be providing stems to the mix stage that are 5.1 surround stems, and then the dubbing mixer doesn't have to do anything. He just assigns them and you're done, and you're getting your surround. This is very typical though on lower budget films. So as I said, I have 15 stems to choose from, starting at the top: woodwinds, brass, strings, vocal, solo instruments, guitars, bass, keyboards, synths, pads, drones, drums, percussion, hits, and then my reverb. A total of 15 stereo stems, which is a lot. I mean, really, do you ever need to go wider than 15 stems? And even 15 stems can be, it's pretty wide. So I haven't encountered a situation yet where 15 stems don't do what I need. It allows a lot of flexibility, and I'm trying to be in a situation where I'm giving the dubbing mixer or whoever's dealing with the music at the final mix the most amount of flexibility possible. Now, these stems it's basically a general template. Not every movie I do is going to have guitars in it. Not every movie I do is going to have synths in it. Not every movie I do is going to have percussion. But I'm not going to change the names of these stems. I just leave them like that, and then I'm just a little more creative about how I assign things. So let's take a look. Starting at the top of my audio tracks here, first thing I have, and I'm soloing, and you can't see, but I'm going over to live and just muting live over there. And so now I'm soloing this. So that to me, it's a synth, but kind of sounds like the bass of this track, maybe. So I will assign that to the bass stem, which is up there. Okay, now if I play that track and go and look at my stems, you can see the green light. That sound is now coming out of the bass stem. And it really is that simple. Let's continue. That's drums. That's Tom's big drums. So that guy will go to the drums. Here we have. So do I want to put that in the percussion, or do I want that to be separate from the drums, or do they belong together as a unit? Well, let's listen to both of them and find out. I could see a situation where someone might say, I want those snares turned down, but leave the drums where they are, or the other way around. So I'm going to put the snares into the percussion stem. That keeps it separate from the drums, and then they are independent. Moving on. I don't know what this is because I haven't named it. I'm very lazy about that. Now that is a drum really, but it's also kind of a hit. So I'm going to put that in the hit stem. And so far, we've managed to have every sound be on a different stem, which is exactly what you want. Moving on. That's a gnarly synth. Let's call it a synth. Let's put that in the synth track. That's kind of drum-like, so I'm going to pop that on the drum stem, and you will notice that my previous element I had assigned to drums over there is far from this one. So I've still managed to keep everything separate. Moving on. And that's like, I mean, that's strings. That's a sort of affected pizzicato. So let's pop that in the string stem. Let's just check if we have strings going on at this time. We do. Let's go and listen to what they are doing. Okay, so it's the same thing. It's the same idea. And so those are going automatically to the string stem. And this one I've just assigned to the string stem. Makes perfect sense. Moving on. Okay, this is kind of a signature sound. It's one of the shark themes, if you like. So let me put that in the solo instrument stem, because it is kind of its own solo sound. And going on. This too is one of my shark sounds, and it is separate. They don't happen at the same place. So I'm also going to put this in the solo instrument stem. And that's it for my audio tracks. Now, moving on to my instrument tracks. The first thing we have here, it only happens once, is this. Now that could be many things, but I want to see if it's happening at the same time my bass is happening. Yes, it is, so I don't really want to put it in the bass track. It's happening at the same time my toms is happening, but it's not happening at the same time my other thing that I assigned to a synth stem happens over there, and this guy is free of that. Doesn't happen in the same place, so I can put this in the synth stem, and it is kind of a synth. So not like I'm totally lying or cheating. Off you go. Next is this track, which that's definitely a synth, and this other element is not happening at that time, so that is perfect for me to put this into the synth stem again. And I now have 3 different elements that have been assigned to that synth stem, and lucky for me, they don't happen at the same place. So those elements are completely separated, which is great. If they need to turn any of these up or anything like that at the stage, they can do it without messing anything else up, which is awesome. Now I have the next 6 tracks are all one idea. It's a string line. It's the same line, just doubled 6 times so that I can get a natural sound with that bend down that I'm doing at the end there. But these guys, okay, bring my mixer up here so that I can assign all of these together, and they will all go to the string stem, which is up there. Okay, this guy. Now that's a sort of solo instrument, but I've already used that solo stem for something else. So I'm going to use, because it is kind of a keyboard-ish type of sound, I will use the keyboard stem, which we haven't used yet, will contain that sound. Now the next, and in fact the next also 6 tracks are choir, I believe. So I select those 6, and those will go to my vocal or voice stem over there. Okay, and then the next thing we have is this. Okay, that's the same element, sort of a part B of this element here. It's kind of the same idea, which went to the solo stem. So this will go to the solo stem. And this here is another one of my shark theme signatures, whatever you want to call it. So I could put it in that same solo stem, but there's a bit of an overlap here. Yeah. So in this case, this is an important sound. I can easily see this sound being an option for someone to turn up or turn down or move or something like that. So, you know, tape is cheap. There's no need to be conservative. I have plenty of options still open that have not been used. One of them is pads. I'll just call it guitars. I mean, it's not a guitar, but whatever. It doesn't matter. It now has its own track. And we are done with all of this. However, I still need to bus my live, the stuff that's coming in from Ableton Live. So let me close these folders and open up my live stuff. Now let me just bring live over here to take a quick look. I'm going to unsolo it, and I'm going to solo this so that we can listen to live now completely alone. So you can see now in live, my live is bussed into buses in Logic, which I'm now going to bus into their stems. Each of these has a separate bus. You can see here this track and this track I've already bussed to the same, because that's the same element. Let me just solo those two guys. That's the same element. That will end up going onto probably my drum stem. And this... Okay, I'm just familiarizing myself with what I have in here. That's percussion. That's percussion. And this is an important stem that I'm going to want to have that separate. So now I'm going to put this back on its screen over there. Of course you can't see this, but I can still see in the screen grab. You can't see this, but I can still see it. So let's go and have a look. The first thing, which is coming through live 3 and 4, we can go and play it. It starts at 15, I believe. That's coming through 3 and 4. That should be a drum. Now I have the other drums bussed to the drum stem as well. Let me just find the drum. That's this guy here. Just going to solo that. You know, now that I listen to them together, I'm thinking I would like to have that element separate, because it's really low. It's almost like a hit, but I've already used the hit stem for something, so I'm going to find something else for that, so that I can have it separate, because it's a very low. Let's say I'll put that on the drone track, and that will give those guys their own separate thing, because there's a lot of sub in there. I could see a situation where the guys are sitting on the stage and they play this cue and someone goes, oh, there's a little too much sub there. And without having to mess with too much stuff, they will have that separate, and they can just bring that down a bit, and that'll fix the problem right there and then. If I mix that with the other drums and they suddenly bring that down, then the other drums are going to be brought down too, which I don't want. So that is going to the drone stem. 5 and 6 was that cool little synth sound. But that sound, I think, makes sense to put at. I haven't used the pad stem yet, seeing as though it is kind of a pad. That will go onto its own stem called pads. The next two are both going to be percussion. Now, all of a sudden, the snares that I assigned to percussion over here are no longer separate. So what I'm going to do in this case is there is one sound that I assigned to the Alright, actually I'm going to go back and change something. I just realized this element here that I assigned to the hits stem is really the same as these two things that I have going on in live. coming through 3 and 4. So I'm going to take that off the drone stem and put it onto the same stem as this element in here, the hit stem, because those guys belong together. They're the same idea. Okay, good. And then the snares, I wanted to get them onto a separate track, so why don't I take that snare thing and put that on the pads track. I mean, it's got nothing to do with pads, but whatever. I'd rather have that guy separate because I know that could be an issue. So that's that. And then we have the percussion, and then this guy here. It's a very important sound, and I think it's imperative to have that sound separately. And seeing as though my bass and my synths and so many things are happening at this time, the only way I can get that totally separate is to have it on its own stem. So I'm going to put this on the woodwind stem. Again, it's got nothing to do with woodwinds, but I now have used, I think, every single stem available to me, except for the drone stem. I have not used the drone stem, but it makes sense. This is the last piece in the movie, and I think it's important to have as much separation as possible and flexibility as possible. So now that I have everything stemmed like that, if I push play, let me close everything here just to make it easier. You can see here are my stems, and we can look at the green lights. And so just an example of how I deal with that reverb stem. Here is a sound. Let me just mute live quickly. Here is a sound that we bust to the solo instruments. I have that sound bust to a reverb. It's a very long 10-second reverb. One of my favorite sounding long reverbs, EOS. And that is bust to the reverb stem. So that reverb, not the sound, because the sound's going to the solo stem, but the reverb of that sound is going to land up on this stem here. And that enables the guys at the stage to put that in the surrounds, just that sound of the reverb. And that will really give you a nice surround effect. So now that we have everything bust, unsolo everything here, and we are ready to print now. So I'm just going to go a bar before, and I've record enabled all the stems. I believe I didn't use the drone stem, so that's the only one I'm going to undo. But I'm going to watch carefully while I'm printing, and if I see any green activity here, I will be sure to go and investigate. So let's take a quick shot at this. Okay, and there you have it. You can go and investigate, and you can see that there is information on every stem. It looks like things were done correctly. Now that this is set up, if I, for any reason, have to go back and make any adjustments, I don't have to reassign. Stuff is now assigned. So this is super awesome. And even though you might be working in Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever, the idea behind it's the same. Different programs have different ways of bussing and all this stuff. Doesn't really matter. The theory behind it's the same. Okay, so this might sound like the most boring thing, but it is important how you name your stems. You're presenting these to a mix stage. You want to be accurate, clear, concise, with the minimum risk for error or misunderstanding possible. So let me just show you quickly how I name the stems that I've just printed for this cue. Okay, so you just want to list everything by date so that you can see your stems all in one place here. I have them selected. There are 14 of them. All good so far. They are just named in the way Logic names the stems, based on how I pre-named the tracks, which is already very helpful. But we need more than that. So what I use is a program called Better Finder Rename. There are many kinds of renaming programs out there. Finder even has its own one, which is very nice, but I'm just used to this one. So you can do a whole bunch of different criteria. And you can select any number of ways of changing things. I'm selected right now because I did this before. It's remembering from the previous cue I just did. So let's just go ahead and rename this what it should be, 4M34. My picture version on this print is 3. It's not that cue, it is, and it's version 5. Okay, now you can see on the right it's adding this to the beginning of the names. Let me open this up a little bit more, and all I want to do is add a space there so that you can see this is all correct. So that's good. Let's have it do that, and now you will see I have all of the stems named, and all the information that you could ever want is in there, except for one thing, and I'll explain that in a second. But I still have number 03 at the end. That's completely insignificant for the dub stage. They do not need to see that. So I'll go back to that program, and I will go to character positions and ranges, which is where I can say remove a given number of characters from the end. And I've already got 3 selected, so automatically you can see that number 03 is missing from all the stems. So that looks good. Perform those renames, rename all, and there you go. Now what I want to do is make a folder with those intact, and let's go and name this folder 4M34 stems. And now I'm going to put the time code, the start time code of this cue, which is hour 4, 10 minutes, 1 second, 1 frame. And there you have it inside there. Each of these stems is named with the picture version, so I didn't feel it necessary to put it in the name of this folder. Now put that time code in the name of the folder as just yet another check. One thing I forgot to mention, in your final delivery you're going to do to the dub stage or to the mixing stage, I like to include the printed stereo full mix, and that is just for reference. It's a good thing for them to have. Maybe when they're getting started at the beginning of the day and they just loaded all the stuff in there, but they just want to hear something, they can just bring up that reference stereo mix and just check. Or maybe, maybe something sounds weird in the stems, and they can go back and listen to that reference stereo mix and see if anything is missing in the stems or vice versa. It's just a good thing to do to provide along with your batch of stems. And last but not least, I want to copy that in there so that I can keep this folder full of the most, of all the mixes that I've ever made in the movie, easy to find stuff. Now I've put that mix in there. I name my mixes a tiny bit differently with the project code at the beginning. I don't need that here. And then at the end, I want to give it its stem name, which in this case is going to be, I started with a Z just so that the find will list it at the end, full mix reference or ref. And that way, when they open up this folder of stems, they will see at the bottom of the list is going to be the full mix reference. Now this is something they won't play. This will just be up on their session that they can reference. And like I said earlier, if there's something funky in the stems or they're not sure what's going on, they can always go and reference my stereo complete full mix. And now I will move this folder into my stems folder where all my stems live. And there the folder is with all of its stems. And I will now compress that and make a zip file so that I can then drag that zip file over to the Dropbox or wherever they are getting their stems from. And you are done with your stems for this cue. So I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I hope that wasn't too much of an earful. A lot of information in there, but I hope you got something out of it. Please subscribe. Please leave comments and questions. And thank you for watching. I'll catch you next week. We're always learning.